Today what we're going to do is we're going to look at slope-intercept form. It is section 4.5 of our textbook. You're going to notice that we've already done a test on the first three standards in this chapter, and the last two are what we're addressing right now, specifically this unit or this chapter or section, slope-intercept form. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this. Again, this is kind of a review, or should be review, because we've talked about it before. Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. Again, note that y comes first, then comes the equal sign, then comes a number, whatever that is, and then the x, and then comes the number that hangs off to the side. Remember that when we talk about the m, which is placed right here, this number right here, is your slope, and the number that is out to the side here, this is your y-intercept. So just a little bit of review of what we've had before. Now let's move on. Here's an example that you're going to see in your assignment. It's going to ask you to identify the slope and the y-intercept. Again, we need to make sure it's in the form y equals mx plus b. And you're going to notice that this equation is in that form. I've got my y, then I have my equals, then I have my x with that number in front, and then I've got a number that's hanging out there. So it's already in that form. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull things out. So again, the number in front of the x is considered your m. So you'll notice I found my x. That number right here, this is considered my m. So I'm going to pull out my m. My m is 4. Or we can also write it as 4 over 1. And yes, I want you to write it both ways, because the next time we look at this chapter, we're going to be graphing these. And so we need to realize that 4 is the same thing as 4 over 1. And now b, if I take a look at it off to the side, it says plus b. You're going to notice that this is not plus but minus. And so my b in this example is b equals, and it's going to be negative 1. And that's all you need to do in this problem. Now let's go on to number 2. You're going to notice that for number 2, y is not by itself. It's got a number in front of it, which is 4, and we need to get rid of that. So to get rid of that, you'll notice that there's multiplication between the 4 and the y. I'm going to divide both sides by 4. When I do that, these 4's right here, they kind of cancel. You don't have to write that, but know that they do. And I end up with y equals, and you're going to take a look, you've got these two numbers on top of each other. So I'm going to write 3 over 4, and I'm going to leave the x out there. And then I'm going to go plus, and you're going to notice that these two numbers are also next to each other. So I'm going to write it as 16 over 4. Now we're going to see if we can reduce things. So if I take a look at this, y equals, the number in front of the x is 3/4. That really can't be reduced. Again, the number in front of x can never, ever be a decimal. So we're not going to write that as 0.75. We wouldn't even write it as a mixed number if we could. We're going to leave it as rise over run, or 3 over 4. So I'm going to leave that as 3/4 x, and I'm going to write a plus. And then if you'll take a look at these two can be reduced, and it could be a decimal, because that is my y-intercept. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go 16 divided by 4. That gives me 4. Now what I can do is I can pull out my m. My m is 3 over 4, because again, it's the number in front of the x. And my b is the number that sticks out right here. And you're going to notice it's positive, so it's going to be 4. So that's my slope and my y-intercept. Now let's go on to the next example. All right, you're going to notice that y is not by itself, and we need to get it by itself. And when we worked on this in the past, we kind of highlighted the y, and it's like, don't touch it. It could even be in pen. We are not going to touch that y. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to subtract 4x. And you're going to notice my leftovers. Notice that there's a negative here. So I'm going to make this negative 2y equals, and my negative 4x is going to go first. It's kind of like my line leader. And then that 8 is positive, so I'm going to write plus 8. Again, that y is like, I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to peel it off. The negative 2 on the y has multiplication involved, and so to undo it, I'm going to divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2. So when I do that, those negative 2's, they cancel, and I get y equals negative 4 over negative 2x. Again, it's these two. And then I'm going to put the x next to it. And then I'm going to grab these two. And that's plus 8 over negative 2. Now let's see if we can clean this up. Y equals, you're going to notice I have a negative 4 over negative 2 right here. This can reduce and make it into a nice, neat fraction. So I'm going to write that as 2x plus, and if I take a look at these two numbers, they can also be reduced into minus 4. So my m is 2 or 2 over 1, and b is negative 4. All right, that is it for part 1. So if you are working on part 1, you can stop the video now. All right, if you are on to day 2, this is where you should be starting. We're going to take a look at some of the things that we've done in the past, and we're going to add to it. So notice that the directions are different with this section. You're going to notice it asks you to graph the equation, and it asks us to use slope-intercept form. And if you remember from yesterday or from the previous section, we did y equals mx plus b, where m is my slope and b is my y-intercept. Okay? So when we look at this first problem, what we need to do is we need to get the y by itself. So I'm going to come down here, step 1, rewrite the equation in y equals mx plus b form. So I'm going to take this equation, and I'm going to get the y by itself. So I'm going to highlight this. I want to get that by itself. So I'm going to subtract 4x from each side. I end up with y equals, and the x comes before the 2. So I'm going to go minus 4x, and I'm going to go plus 2. So now I got it in slope-intercept form, and I am done with step 1. Now we're going to move on to step 2. Step 2 says that I'm going to identify the m and the b. So if I take a look at this again, the number in front of the x is my m. So it's going to be negative 4 or negative 4 over 1. And yes, I want you to write both of them. And then my b is this number hanging off here, and that is a 2. Now you're done with step 2. The next step is going to be plot the b. So I'm going to take this right here, and I'm going to plot that first on my graph. So if you scroll down a little bit, you're going to notice I have a graph. Okay, again, this is my y, this is my x axis. The x and y axes are kind of in the middle of the graph. Sometimes that's a good idea, sometimes it's not. So make sure you take a look at your information first. And again, we talked about the b being 2. So I'm going to find my y-axis, which is right here, okay? And I'm going to find 2. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to find this, and that's 2. You always plot your b first. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back up, and we're going to take a look at my slope. You're going to notice that it's negative 4 over 1. If your top number or your numerator is negative, you're going to move down first. If your top number is positive, you're going to move up. Since it's negative, we're going to move down. So I'm going to take a look at this. Okay. I'm going to move down 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to move right 1, and I'm going to put a point. I'm going to go again because it's -4. I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to go right 1, and I'm going to put a point. Now, you do not need to highlight that highlight piece. I'm just showing you why it works. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to draw our line and put arrows on either end. And that's it. You just graphed a line using slope-intercept form. Make sure that you put arrows on either end of that line. All right, what do we know about parallel lines? Well, one thing that we know about parallel lines is that they never touch. Another thing that we know about parallel lines is they have the same m, or the slope. And the third thing we know, they have different b's, or y-intercepts. And that's key. These are going to have the same m, or slopes, and they're going to have different b's, or y-intercepts. Okay, so let's take a look at this next problem. Tell whether the graph of the two equations are parallel lines and explain your reasoning. This is key, explain. Make sure that you do that. So really what we're going to be comparing is we're going to be comparing our slopes and our y-intercepts. So we're going to take these. My m on this equation is 3, and my b on this equation is -5. In this equation, I need to get y by itself. So I'm going to subtract my 3x. Y equals -3x plus 5. My m here is -3, and my b is 5. So we're kind of doing the same thing. We need to pull out our m's. We need to pull out our b's. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to compare our slopes. So if I compare these, you're going to notice that they are different. Again, parallel lines have the same slope. So we need to explain. We're going to say no, not parallel. M is different. Now we could go on and we could compare the b's, or the y-intercepts, but it really doesn't make any sense because we already know that they're not parallel because our slopes are not the same. All right, let's go on to the next equation. We're going to pull out my m's. So my m here is -2, and my b is 5. You're going to notice that this equation kind of is and kind of isn't in slope-intercept form. You're going to notice that the y is by itself, but the problem that we have is this second part. It's not on the right side. So what we're going to do is we can take these two sides and we can flip-flop them and rewrite them. So I can write y equals, and I can go 5 minus 2x. So all I did was flip the sides. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip-flop my 2x and my 5. So I can just flip-flop them. I don't have to add or subtract anything because they're on the correct side. They just need to change order. Now I can pull out my m, which is -2, and I can pull out my b, which is 5. So now what we're going to do is we're going to compare our m's. All right, so if I take a look at this, my m is -2, my m is -2. Hey, you're thinking, they're parallel. This is great. However, we got a problem because my m's are the same, but if I take a look at my b's, this is 5 and this is 5. So they aren't different, they're the same. So no, not parallel. M is the same, but B is the same too. So again, B needs to be different, and it's not. So in fact, they're the same line. They have the same M and they have the same B, and if they're the same line, they can't be parallel. All right, let's move on to the next one. You're going to notice that none of them are in slope-intercept form. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract my 4x. Y equals negative 4x minus 2. My M is negative 4. My B is negative 2. Okay, my other equation, I'm going to subtract my x. 4y equals negative x minus 2. My y is still not by itself. It needs to be totally by itself. So I'm going to divide by 4. Y equals negative 1/4 x minus 2 over 4. Or y equals negative 1/4 x minus 1/2. And yes, you should reduce that. Notice that it's bottom heavy, and when it's bottom heavy, this number is larger than the top, so the 2 goes on the bottom. I'm going to pick out my m. My m is negative 1/4. My b is negative 1/2. And you're going to notice that my m's, they're not the same. So no, not parallel slopes are different. And again, the slopes need to be the same and the y-intercepts need to be different. All right, let's move on to the final problem for today. You're going to notice the first equation is ready to go. So m equals negative 1/2 and my b equals 3. Notice this next equation is not ready, so I'm going to subtract my x. 2y equals negative x minus 6. Divide by 2. Y equals negative 1/2 x minus 6 over 2. I'm going to keep it as negative 1/2 x minus, and you're going to notice that this can be reduced to negative 3. So my m is negative 1/2, and my b equals negative 3. So now if we're comparing my slopes, notice that this slope is negative 1/2, and this slope is negative 1/2. Hey, they could be parallel, but now we need to take a look at my b's. My b here is 3. My b here is negative 3, and they are different. So that means that, yes, they're parallel. So, yes, they are parallel. Slopes are the same and B's are different. Okay, so the main idea of today, we graphed a line. We graph our B first, and then we do our slope, and then we went ahead and we decided whether lines were parallel or not. Again, for them to be parallel, the slopes need to be the same and the y-intercepts need to be different.